Welcome back to Underrated History. This is Jason. I'm actually recording this on Monday night, but this will be posted on Tuesday. And here's why. Tuesday, I have a fantasy football draft, and I have a appointment at a brand new gym that I'm trying out in the afternoon. So after I log off, I'm going to have both of those events going back to back. So by the time you're seeing this, it's Tuesday evening, but I'll be doing one of those two things. So here's my underrated history for today. Unlike Steve Buscemi, you're not going to know this name. But he's a pivotal central figure in one of the biggest moments at the end of the U.S. Civil War. Today's underrated history is around Gordon Granger. And you're like, okay, who's Gordon Granger? Well, as I said, he is the central figure of one of the biggest pivotal moments in American history. That event, it was Juneteenth. And Gordon Granger is the general who actually rolled into the Aston Villa train station in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865, hence the name Juneteenth. Now, June 19th, 1865, he read Executive Order Number 3, which declared that all slaves in the state of Texas are hereby declared free, which of course set off an ecstatic reaction from the black American population in Galveston at the time, and eventually across the entire state of Texas. Now, okay, so why is General Granger doing this in Galveston? Well, Gordon Granger was appointed, as you can figure, the immediate aftermath of the U.S. Civil War, which the surrender at Appomattox happened on April 9th of 1865. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated 3 days after the surrender on April 12th of 1865. So at this point, it's basically chaos in America. You have a defeated Confederacy with no power or authority anymore at this point. But you have a largely paralyzed United States Union government. Now, Andrew Johnson had assumed the presidency by this point, but he had not been able to set the course of the country because we're only 2 months after that at this point. And so Gordon Granger was basically unofficially appointed kind of an interim governor of Texas at this point, despite being a military figure. Now, his career as a military figure is important because in 1863, there are two pivotal battles that occurred in which his actions turned those battles in favor of the Union. And the reason why he was able to do this is because Granger was not a commanding chief. He was a couple rungs below General Ulysses Grant at this point. And however, he made a couple of very executive decisions in battles that turned them, because the battlefield generals at this particular time were losing. But Granger took his forces and committed them to reinforcing the Union troops at those points. And I can't remember right now what the names of those two battles were. I will say though that Gettysburg is not one of them. None of the more famous ones. They were two battles that were, again, really unrecognized history, but kind of like Sergeant Pavlov in my previous episode. He is a mid-tier general who bolstered the forces of more senior generals and turned those battles of the war. And of course, the war was eventually won on April 9th of 1865. But again, after this point, we have an assassinated President Lincoln and a barely in office President Johnson, and a completely eliminated Confederacy with no authority, and an imprisoned Confederacy President, Jefferson Davis. So as you can figure at this point, Texas didn't have much of a ruler. Enter Gordon Granger. He's basically appointed what amounts to an interim governor. And so he traveled to Galveston. Executive Order Number 3 was written by him. It was not written by anybody in Washington or anybody in the Union government. This is what he wrote because he had the authority to do it. But it basically was a copy. It was basically a copy of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which basically says, oh yeah, by the way, this is in effect here now. It's basically to say that according to the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, you're all now free. However, there are extended points beyond that. It wasn't just a Wild West saga to the Berlin Wall like it was under Egon Krenz, the East German leader from yesterday's edition. But the direction of Granger at this point was that the slaves were to continue working for their masters, but they were to be compensated for it, therefore practically ending slavery at that immediate moment, while still not eliminating those plantation owners' production, which was important at this point, because this was a well thought through procedure by General Granger because the Confederacy needed every bit of economic activity it could get, because at this point of 1865, their economy is completely devastated. There's nothing left to say. You know, it's kind of like what Russia looks like right now after Ukraine has gotten done counterpunching them. You know, I mean, the Confederacy, their infrastructure was so disastrous that Granger's trip to Galveston was very, very problematic because of the destroyed railroads. But after getting around a few hurdles, he eventually did make it on June 19th, 1865. Read Executive Order 3, freed the slaves, but at the same time, ordered them to continue working for their masters, but to do it for compensation. So practically he ended slavery on the spot, although the system would take many years to eventually eliminate under Reconstruction and Andrew Johnson. So this is the long-winded story of Gordon Granger and how he got to Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865. The freed slaves are the ones who came up with the name Juneteenth. I know it's declared as a federal holiday in the United States in 2024. Don't blame anybody today for that name. That was a name that was conjured up by the very slaves that were freed. Which, I mean, if we're going to be practical about it, I really couldn't think of a better name because it was June 19th and it needed a name to permanently commemorate it. Now, the other thing to remember about Juneteenth as a holiday is it became a federal holiday in 2024. But it's been a state holiday in the state of Texas since 1980. Legislation of which was actually put through by a Republican governor. Surprise, surprise. That was Bill Clements. You know, the legislation got put through by a largely Republican legislature and a Republican governor in the form of Clements. Juneteenth, at the time that I was growing up there, was mandatory learning in 7th grade. We had to learn about it because Texas history at that time, and I don't know if this is still true or not, but Texas history was the 7th grade mandatory social studies class. So I was supposed to learn about it. And I learned about Gordon Granger. And I learned about these people. And the more shocking thing, and I can't do a really episode on this next thing, but Juneteenth and the slaves were freed in 1865. The worst natural disaster in American history would then happen in 1900. 35 years later, the Galveston hurricane of 1900 struck and killed anywhere between 8,000 to 12,000 people. I still wonder to this day how many of those freed slaves lived through both events. We don't have anybody on record because none of the survivors of the 1900 hurricane are alive to this day. The last of those passed in the 1990s. So anyway, that is my episode here on General Gordon Granger of the Union Army, temporary interim governor of Texas after the Confederacy's surrender and loss of authority at Appomattox on April 9th of 1865, and the corresponding assassination of Abraham Lincoln on April 12th, 1865. So that's it for now. Hopefully I'm getting back from a good workout. I will see you again on Wednesday, and just like the previous day, I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. I'm sure I'll find something. So anyway, guys, peace out, homies.